Good morning. I'm Hassan Giordano, and this is your DMV Daily Dose for Thursday, February 13th, 2020.
It's currently raining and 41 degrees in Baltimore. Expect cloudy skies starting in the afternoon. Today's high will be 53 degrees, and the low will be 41.
The Baltimore Sun is reporting that 2 police officers assigned to a U.S. Marshals task force were shot and wounded yesterday in northeast Baltimore while trying to arrest a former state correctional officer who was wanted for attempted murder in Pennsylvania. The man, identified by 2 state law enforcement officials as Michael Morello, was shot and killed yesterday. Police said that they found a gun on him. Now, earlier Wednesday, local police in Pennsylvania charged Morello, 33 years old, with attempted homicide, gun charges, and reckless endangerment. The charges stem from an incident on Tuesday that a judge issued a warrant for his arrest. According to 6 ABC in Philadelphia, police said Morello fired a gun during an argument in Lower Chester Township in Pennsylvania on Tuesday night. Now, no one was injured during the shooting, and police received a tip that Morello was in Baltimore. Morello resigned last month as a Maryland correctional officer, officials said. He had been acquitted of destruction of property charges in Baltimore last week. His attorney, Thomas Marinick, said that Morello and his ex-girlfriend had been locked in a legal dispute. Quote, "This is a terrible tragedy, and it's sad to hear his life was lost today," Marinick said. Now, law enforcement officers were searching for Morello around noon yesterday when they found him armed in the 5900 block of Radke Avenue. "Our worst fears have become a reality," said Baltimore City Police Commissioner Michael Harrison outside of the Maryland Shock Trauma Center where the officers were hospitalized. "One of the wounded officers required an emergency operation," said Dr. Thomas Scalia, shock trauma's physician-in-chief. "Other officers," he said, saved their colleague's life by applying a tourniquet. Now, Baltimore police spokesman Detective Donnie Moses said that the Baltimore City officer who was shot was released from shock trauma on Wednesday evening. Neighbors recounted a harrowing scene with bursts of gunfire and officers flooding a courtyard of the Garden Village apartments on the edge of Baltimore City. Now, the Capital Gazette has reported on 2 correctional officers, 6 inmates, and 7 outsiders who conspired to smuggle drugs, cell phones, alcohol, and more into the Jessup Correctional Institution over the several years, federal prosecutors charged this week, the latest in a series of arrests that hit the state's troubled prison system. Correctional officers Dominique Booker, 43 years old of Baltimore, and Chanel Pierce, 27 years old of Pikesville, slipped through security screenings at Jessup by hiding the items on their bodies and then traded them for cash, electronic payments, and sex, says the U.S. Attorney's Office. Prosecutors allege the scheme went on from at least 2017 through the beginning of this year. Now, Tuesday's announcement represents the latest attempt by state and federal law enforcement to crack down on what they call rampant corruption in Maryland's 24 prisons and detention centers. More than 200 people, including inmates, correctional officers, and people on the outside, have been charged in federal and state court in recent years, primarily for smuggling, contraband, and related crimes. In December, however, state prosecutors filed charges against 25 members of an elite team of correctional officers, alleging that they employ brutality and intimidation to control prisoners. All have pleaded not guilty. The Baltimore Brew is reporting on a plan to give the aging swimming pool at Baltimore City's Drew Hill Park a makeover that has been floating around for the past few years. But the city is now pushing ahead with a plan that includes a 79-car parking lot that has drawn intense opposition. Yesterday, the Board of Estimates deferred approval of the $10.1 million contract to reconstruct the Drew Hill Aquatic Center and install a parking lot across East Drive next to the tennis courts until later this month, February 26, due to growing opposition to the project. Now, according to documents on file with the council, the project will increase the maximum capacity of the aquatic center from 300 to 500 people, But the new parking lot will be used by employees and visitors at the Recreation and Parks Administrative Building, as well as users of the tennis courts, basketball courts, and pool. Speed bumps, curb bump outs, and crosswalks would be incorporated into the new design to slow down traffic to provide a, quote, safer environment for visitors, the Rec and Parks memo said on the project. However, opponents, such as Councilman Ryan Dorsey of the 3rd District, called the plan crazy, opposing the measure vehemently. This is a terrible and awful idea, the councilman said, speaking before the Land Use and Transportation Committee last month. This belongs nowhere near a public park, in public open space where people are supposed to be able to freely enjoy recreational access, Dorsey said. Now, Casey Keller of the Greater Remington Improvement Association said that her group has voted against the proposal in the past and asked for the committee to defer action on Council Bill 19-0423 until Recreation and Parks could make a formal presentation to her group. Addressing the committee on behalf of Recs and Parks was Adam Borman, Chief of Capital Development. He says that the decision to propose parking in a park is not one we take lightly. We see this as a regional asset. We need to be able to get people from all over the town to this park. There is no MTA bus stops within Drew Hill Park or within even a 10-minute walk to the pool, he notes. The department has scheduled a community meeting next week to unveil the pool plan, which includes water play features and swim lanes, plus a replacement for the current bathhouse building that was constructed in the 1970s. Now, Maryland Matters is also reporting on a $750,000 grant approved but never funded by Maryland's Opioid Command Center to open an Eastern Shore drug rehabilitation facility on an abandoned golf course that has been referred by legislative auditors to Maryland's Attorney General for criminal investigation. Other questionable grant spending within the 3-year-old Opioid Operational Command Center should also be reviewed by criminal investigators, Legislative Auditor Gregory Hook wrote in a letter to lawmakers released publicly on Wednesday. Now, the audit was prompted by an anonymous tip to the Office of Legislative Audits Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Hotline. The allegation raised concerns about a $750,000 grant in February of 2019 to a nonprofit organization to purchase a former country club and golf course in Caroline County. As described in the audit, the goal of the grant was to provide funding for drug rehab services for inmates on work release, students, and the overall community by building an agricultural center that included a farm-to-table restaurant, an event venue, and potentially a 9-hole golf course. The audit found that the command center could not provide written justification for the grant or a determination that the program would be effective. The $750,000 grant was substantially higher than any other awarded by the Opioid Operational Command Center made to any nonprofit in 2019, as all other awards were for $100,000 or less, and that the jurisdiction meant to benefit, Caroline County, was home only to less than 1% of the total opioid deaths here in the state of Maryland in 2018. Now, in that year, there were 13,776 reported opioid overdoses, with 2,143 reported opioid deaths in Maryland, according to state statistics. Now, in a separate finding, auditors concluded that a $100,000 grant from the Opioid Command Center to an out-of-state nonprofit was transferred to 2 private companies to perform the work required by the grant. Now, the educational programs on drug prevention to middle schools and high schools throughout Maryland was one of a few that the companies received about $96,100, which was then transferred to a company owned by senior management of the nonprofit, with the remaining $3,900 being transferred to a company located in the Middle East. Hook's report says that the command center wasn't aware that the nonprofit wasn't directly involved in providing services, a clear violation of terms of the grant agreement limiting the use of private contractors. The nonprofit status of the company, not named in the audit, was questioned in Hook's report. Quote, the transfer of 96% of the grant funds to a private company owned by the nonprofit senior management raises serious questions as to whether the nonprofit's activities were intended for the benefit of its senior management, in violation of federal tax laws, it says, that says a nonprofit must not be organized or operated for the benefit of private financial interests, auditors wrote. When auditors reviewed the nonprofit's IRS disclosures, they found that more than 86% of total revenues in 2016 and 17 were paid to a company owned by a senior manager of the nonprofit. In the end, the nonprofit provided fewer than half of the educational programs promised in the grant agreement after receiving the full award. While the grant stipulated 2 educational programs at 15 schools be administered, 14 of the schools received only 1 program, while the 15th didn't receive any at all. Now, convicted felons who have served their sentence can vote in Maryland elections, but the vast majority of them don't know that they're even eligible to cast a ballot, civil rights advocates said on Tuesday in the Maryland General Assembly. They are urging the members of the Senate and the House to require that the Maryland State Board of Elections and the state's Division of Corrections help former felons regain their status as registered voters. A measure sponsored by Senator Christopher West, Republican from Baltimore County, and Delegate Nick Mosby, a Democrat from Baltimore City, would require those agencies to provide a voter application form and general voting information to people preparing to transfer back into society, says the Maryland Matters article. If you want to ensure that individuals coming home from our prisons and jails feel included and reduce the rates of recidivism, we have to make sure that their rights are protected, said Nicole Hanson Mundell, an executive director of the advocacy organization Out for Justice. Now, Perry Hopkins, a member of that organization and a 58-year-old organizer with Communities United, spent nearly 20 years behind bars following his conviction on drug offenses. A resident of East Baltimore, he cast his ballot for the first time in 2016 after Maryland legislature approved a measure restoring voting rights for convicted felons, an action that benefited 40,000 people or more. That measure took effect after lawmakers overrode a veto from Governor Larry Hogan. Now, House Bill 568 and Senate Bill 372 would also require that people who are being held pending trial who haven't been convicted of a crime must be given absentee ballots. You haven't even gone to court yet, Hopkins said. We need their voices and we need their participation in the process. Under current law, inmates awaiting trial can apply for an absentee ballot, according to the state's Deputy Elections Administrator, Nikki Charlson. You can make a request on our website, or you can fill out the absentee request form. Or you could just write a note to the local Board of Elections saying, please send me an absentee ballot here. Advocates for formerly incarcerated persons said that that's not enough. They said that the state must have elections personnel present in prison facilities to guarantee that people who are legally eligible to vote can gain access to the ballot. Now, I can personally attest to the current law not being enough, as I was the lead plaintiff in a lawsuit against the State Board of Elections after dozens of inmates awaiting trial who we registered personally to vote or who were already registered tried getting absentee ballots by sending that note to the local board and were denied because the Board of Elections request was never responded to. I was a part of the coalition that initially helped change the law on voting rights for formerly incarcerated individuals way back in 2002, a law that was glass half filled, but then later wrote the legislation that restored voting rights to former felons in this state upon the completion of their court-ordered sentence, known as the Voter Registration Protection Act of 2007. I also testified in support of the expansion of that law in 2015 when then State Senator Corey McCray, well, at that time State Delegate Corey McCray, pushed the new law to allow felons to vote even on parole and probation as long as you weren't behind the walls. That law stands today after the Democrats in the Maryland General Assembly overrode the Republican governor's veto in 2016. So if you aren't behind the walls, even if you're on paper on parole and probation, you are eligible to register and get out and cast your ballot. I'm your man, Mr. Politics, and this has been your DMV Daily Dose for Thursday, February 13th, 2020. For more information on articles that I've mentioned, just go on over to that website at www.dmvdaily.news.